So, thanks for joining us today for this program on tree selection and care in a changing landscape. I'm Jessica Philippe, the Member Engagement Librarian at the South Central Regional Library Council. We're using Zoom webinar today, so your mics and your cameras are off for the duration of the webinar, but you're welcome to post questions to the chat throughout the talk. And joining us is Walt Aikman. He's a community forester in Auburn and an ISA certified arborist. So thanks for being here today, Walt.
Oh, you're very welcome, Jessica. Thank you and to Claire Level for inviting me and working with me to prepare something worth your time. I'm very mindful of how busy you all are, and I'm not an experienced Zoom or media person, so if I don't speak clearly or I look strange because my lighting in my library is not adequate, it's not by design. Okay, so we titled this Tree Selection and Care in a Changing Landscape, although we're going to kind of begin with the changing landscape. The way I thought I should do this is to provide you an introduction to myself and a little bit about my background, describe our shared climate change context where we live in upstate New York, and mention a few things about invasive plants and some ways that you and your communities can learn about identification and management for invasive plants. I'm going to mention the importance of considering the urban heat island effect that will greatly affect our communities and our health going forward. Maybe not for us, but for our children and our grandchildren, even here in the Northeast. And then some discussion about what we can plant. That might be fun. So let me reduce myself a little bit in resume terms so you can get an idea of my educational background. My first degree was confirmed by SUNY ESF from my participation in what we call the Ranger School, and that is a forest technology program in Wanakena, New York, in the Adirondacks. It's a one-year transfer program where you put a year in your community college or your undergraduate university and you transfer in for your second year at the Ranger School and become introduced to the science and practices of forestry. Quite a bit there now on surveying and geographic information systems as well. I also have a degree in geology, a bachelor's degree from the University of Rochester. Now, at the time I was starting in the late 70s, there was a language requirement. Every graduate of U of R had to have spoken a foreign or dead language with enough fluency to graduate. The only exemptions were for nursing and engineering students. And so for many, many years, I did not complete my degree because I was a terrible student in the classroom. But I joined the United States Peace Corps, and in the Peace Corps, I was successful in demonstrating sufficient proficiency in a foreign language that I was granted my undergraduate degree while I was in Africa. After Africa, my wife and I moved back to upstate New York. I went to the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry for my resource management degree, master's, and my policy and administration degree for my PhD. But I'm also equally proud of the summer I spent working for the Student Conservation Association. This Student Conservation Corps creates opportunities for young men and women of all ages around the country at national parks. And it is a great way to learn about our national parks, our national forests, and our wildlife protection network here in the United States. It still exists, still does, out in New Hampshire, I believe. And as I mentioned, I was in the Peace Corps, and I did get certified as an Aldo Leopold educator. And I'm very proud of that because Aldo Leopold has had a big impact on my thinking. And finally, as Jessica mentioned, I'm a certified arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture. This certification is quite rigorous and it is not easily achieved. And so if you go to isa-arbor, You can search their database. I think Cornell also provides access to it. Look for a certified arborist near you to help you with your tree questions on your property. Where am I? This is why I'm probably here, because this is kind of like where I like to be. I like hanging out with trees. I like studying them. I like learning about them. And I like to learn about what other people have to say about them, good or bad. The time I spent doing community and forestry in Swaziland, Africa, was very important to me. Had a lot of successes, had some significant failures, but in general, it was an outstanding experience. It taught me the importance of working in a local context. This passion of mine to search for fascinating trees has not abated, however. Here I am in Puerto Rico, where on a student field trip, I finally located one of the most famous trees in the world in Western history, and that is the lignum vitae, the wood of life. And it is a fascinating tree. It is not the hardest wood in the world, according to the hardness scale of woods, but it is a very hard wood. And because of its unusual resin content, and because of its early reputation as being a source of the fountain of youth, these very special properties have made it it is quite rare, and it is actually protected under international conservation, the International Treaties on Conservation, the IUCN treaties that are part of the Endangered Species Act. Here I am in New Orleans, checking out live oaks, and upstate New York, looking at great big silver maples. And most recently in a trip to Southern California to see the only single-leafed pine in the world. Very interesting things taking place in the southwestern United States, geologically, climatologically, and botanically. Incredible diversity in conifers and oaks, however, many of which are in great danger because of invasive plants and climate change and, as you know, fire. This fascination of mine for these amazing organisms does not extend only to their botanical properties, however. I confess I am an avid woodworker, and I treasure each and every piece of wood I find, and I take great joy in trying to repurpose woody materials that are either considered substandard or worthy of a dumpster. I spend a lot of time collecting abandoned wood. And one of the things that fascinates me so much about wood is that wood, like all of us listening today, they're living beings. They are metabolizing nutrients every second of the day, and at night they respire. Just that their breaths they take in and exhale take a lot longer than ours. But when you stand in front of a living tree, pound for pound, it has quite a bit of water in it, about the same amount of water that we have in us, pound for pound. And the annual rings that many trees record have become a touchstone for us, a way of connecting to another organism. And if we give it some time and think about it, there's ways to help each other connect to plants and the wider world around us by thinking about these rings. Now, perhaps my fascination with this notion that we could be on all fours with our fellow creatures and plants began when I was 19 years old, when I spent a summer at the Grand Canyon National Park and got to read the Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. That this cover says is a book that can sit comfortably on the shelf next to Thoreau and John Muir. I remember something that Bill McKibben said about Henry David was that that Henry David Thoreau had a prescience about him. He predicted, he saw it all coming. Everything we worry about today, he saw it way back when in Massachusetts. And John Muir, a man after my own heart, although I have two eyes that function, John Muir's essays about the hoofed locusts destroying the native plants of California is a man after my own heart. But Aldo Leopold and his wife Estelle, when they were living in Madison, Wisconsin, they picked up a piece of property up along in a place called Baraboo on the Wisconsin River. And he and his wife restored this property, and it taught him a lot about listening to the land and thinking about change over time and all the many factors that go into learning about a place and caring about it deeply. This is the famous shack that he and his wife and kids restored. And these are pictures I took of a family pilgrimage from back in, I don't know, I think it was 2012. And we got to go inside, and the kids could see the bunks where the Leopold family would hang out in the evenings. And in the daytime, they were out on the river collecting the type of wood that would float up in a flood and trying to understand the natural history of the lumber that came down the river. So it was a lot of fun to think about my own kids enjoying that landscape. Now, the Leopold is important to me because he really was one of the earliest scientists, one of the first foresters who managed to put into words a very important biological concept, that of the ecosystem, with the pace and timing and expectations of human endeavors. And I like this little quote from a Sand County Almanac where Elder Leopold says that land as a community is the basic concept of ecology, but that land is to be loved and respected is an extension of ethics. So a proprietary sense, a propitiation is sort of like a sixth sense of knowing what's right around you. Not only right and wrong, good and bad, but what fits and what makes sense. And one of my favorite essays that I used a lot with college students was his essay called Good Oak. And in this essay, Elder Leopold wrote about sawing down an oak tree, and every single year the growth ring would announce a different part of that history in the state of Wisconsin and in American history as well. And so as we read The Good Oak aloud, we would get our young adult students sawing the log together. Now, this tool is a lot slower than a chainsaw. I have plenty of chainsaws, but it's a very good experience to take your time and then later have an assignment where you draw the cross section of the tree. You try to draw in every growth ring, and then you integrate your story into the life of the tree and the events of the landscape around you. This is one of the more interesting essay projects I ever did with my students, and I found it to be a very successful way to break the ice, get us all focused on the same page, so to speak, about our place in a landscape. Now, I'm no different because each of us could saw this log together. We could pick a log to look at and think about. So this is my own. The year I was born, of course, the year my dad was born, the years my parents met, when I met my wife, key events in New York State history, big storms in the Adirondacks, major events when New York State decided to do something about toxics in their air, water, and workplace. And of course, key events in the evolution of our relationship with wildlife. Like, for example, when not even 10 miles from where I sit here in Auburn, New York, the very last wolf was shot in the early 30s here in upstate New York. And one of my most favorite writers is Barry Lopez, who said in his essay, the essay is entitled, "We Are Shaped by the Sound of Wind and the Slant of Sunlight." He wrote, "The key, I think, is to become vulnerable to a place. If you open yourself up, you can build intimacy. Out of such intimacy may come a sense of belonging, a sense of not being isolated in the universe." And that's sure how I felt connected yesterday during the eclipse. My wife and I and several friends enjoyed it up here in Sterling, New York, not far from the shore of Lake Ontario, on our own little piece of land that we are trying to get to know quite intimately. Now, this landscape in northern Cuyahoga County, this piece of property we own, shown here in the little red box on the lower left-hand side of your screen, is a piece of property that was acquired by an electrical utility. They very carefully purchased 3,000 acres in the 60s and 70s with every intention of building a nuclear power plant. But the week they announced the plant was the same week there was this accident. I think it was something called 3 Mile Island. I don't know, something went wrong. And ever since that time, no nuclear power plant has been built in New York State. And this plant along Lake Ontario was never constructed. As it is, half of that 3,000 acres was put into a forever wild context, if you will. It's not protected by the New York State Constitution like the Adirondack or Catskill Parks forest preserves, but it is rather protected through conservation easements that are held by the New York State Department of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation in partnership with Cuyahoga County. And we get to live next door to that forever wild land. And we are enjoying every minute of learning the details of this place. We noticed that a lot of the ash trees that we have were killed by the invasive emerald ash borer. And so here I am sawing up one of our ash trees to build a timber for a barn that we've built ourselves. Working carefully with chainsaws. Yes, I could have used an adze. I could have used a crosscut saw, but I didn't. I used chainsaws. I used my Alaskan chainsaw equipment to mill up a great big timber for our barn that we were building. We are timber framers. My wife and I spent some time at the Shelter Institute in Bath, Maine, and spent 20 years looking for property until we were lucky enough to find this property where we are slowly and carefully building a little homestead with timber frame techniques. Basically, you use mallets and chisels to cut holes in the wood called mortises, and then you shape the ends of other pieces of wood into elongated pieces that are carefully matched to fit that hole. And those elongated pieces are called tenons, and then they fit together to form the frame of the structure. Here we are assembling this part of the structure into what we call a bent. So the post on the right is married to a beam and a brace, and then we use very powerful winching tools to bring them all together before they can be lifted into place and tied together. Slowly and carefully, working together, my wife and I crafted a large barn that we hope will, and well, it's already being used as our greenhouse and a woodworking shop. And as our operation expands into a demonstration of regenerative economics, we are having a lot of fun learning and sharing together the skills it takes to build a real, authentic timber frame. Here is a floor joist that is let into a beam. The beam is supported by a brace, which in turn is connected to a supporting post. We've managed to get the entire frame up. We have roof, and now we even have electricity. The structure allows us to carry out our different activities, the potting that goes on to pot the plants, the equipment I use to take care of invasive plants and try to restore the native vegetation. My wife is an avid beekeeper, and here she is working with a chainsaw to remove a log located beehive that the owners just could not tolerate on their property. If you are really interested in getting into beekeeping, check with your Cornell Cooperative Extension Office, see who the beekeepers are in your community, get involved. It's a lot of fun. We get called every spring for people who find swarms in their cars, in their garages, on their picnic tables, and we go and we retrieve swarms. And this process of getting to know a place has been deeply rewarding. And you all know what it's like to go outside and see what's new and see what's changed, to watch the progression of life through the calendar year. Well, this is the science of phenology. And the phenology has at its heart something called Hopkins' law, which refers to the seasonal timing of plant and wildlife activity, which we know is a function of latitude, longitude, and elevation. By the way, if you want a fantastic calendar on phenology, the Aldo Leopold Foundation does sell a phenology calendar off their website. By the way, all the links and the titles that I'm mentioning in this talk, I've given to Jessica, and she will share it with all the participants. And, you might think that's a strange juxtaposition here. I'm talking about phenology in Ella Leopold, and how can I do this clumsy, horrible transition? Well, in a way, this is another timekeeper. This is Dr. Al Kozlowski, waving hands during the pandemic. He is our state geologist. And Dr. Kozlowski and his team of geologists travel New York State, and they drill, and they explore, and they measure, and they analyze glacial and hard rock sediments of our stratigraphy to interpret the rock history of New York State. It just so happened that they were drilling up in the town of Owasco in Cayuga County, right in the middle of a wetland remediation project that I was consulting the town with. And unfortunately, we had to call Al and say, please, you got to move your stuff. Unfortunately, some of the drilling equipment was from a firm in Canada, and it took them about a year to get their permission to come back into the States because, as you know, what a nightmare that whole COVID thing was. Now, one of the things that the New York State geologists and the New York State Museum share with us are the New York State quadrangles that reflect the superficial geology of different quadrangles in New York State. Now, I know it's another taboo to show you a slide in a PowerPoint presentation where you can't read it from the back of the room. So I'll zoom in a little bit because the superficial geology map of Auburn happens to have this little star shows about where I live. Next to this dotted line, which shows the last known glacial margin in this part of the Finger Lakes. So when the glaciers were retreating as the climate warmed, 9,000 years ago, it was sitting right in my own front yard. So there it was. Didn't even stop to say hello to me. And you would hardly credit it, but there is an intrepid group of scientists called the Friends of the Pleistocene. And these folks gather every summer and lead a series of fantastic field trips to interpret the Pleistocene geology of the northern United States. And in 2014, they came to Auburn, New York to study and talk about the superficial geology changes in Cayuga County, New York. And we went to a fascinating location in the Great Gully in Cayuga County, not far from Aurora and Wells College, where there are ancient soils that contain leaves. More than 8,000 years old, oak, beech, and hawthorn leaves still available at the surface. It tells us something. We know a lot about what this landscape was like all those many years ago. These Cornell University graphics help depict the extent of the last glacial reach about 24,000 years ago, and have been retreating slowly ever since. The view from South Hill showing the retreat of the glaciers as they work their way north. And that this climbing trend, we know in our own lifetime, has been rapidly accelerated. We've left the Holocene, this period of time after the Pleistocene, we've left the Holocene in the dust because we are now in the Anthropocene, or the Anthropocene, however you'd like to pronounce it, a time of our geologic history, of our geologic timescale, which is dominated by the activities of humans. So I hope this is accurate. And this is as of January 2024, showing the global measurement of carbon in the atmosphere at over 423 parts per million. We know that it would be ideal to be down around 350 parts per million, but we see no indication globally that our nations are going to do much about this. Global temperatures on the rise by decade in terms of their aberration from global means have, in these different decades, beginning in the 80s, moving into the 90s, as you can see, we are starting to show over decades the gradual increase in the mean temperatures all over the world. There's not much doubt about this. Very alarming, however, right now in 2024 is that these global sea surface temperatures are anomalously high. They're much warmer than they were even last year. So we can all hope that things will cool down over this coming year, but there's no chemical reason to think that they will. In fact, daily global surface air temperatures are still quite high coming into 2024. And the anomalous high temperatures, especially in Europe and North America, are quite concerning. You try to zoom into a larger scale to our own region, we now see that we don't have as much ice, even in the Great Lakes like we used to. And that is going to transform the ecosystems of the Great Lakes. Many of the research projects that scientists were working on in different parts of the Great Lakes couldn't be conducted as planned because they couldn't get to those locations. So this leads me to the first book recommendation of our talk today, and that's Ben's book, The Tree Line. I love this book, and I love this book because it's not exactly an alarmist book, but by traveling around the world to look at where the tree line is changing, whether it's in Wales or Scotland. My favorite chapter was on Alaska, chapter 4, when he talked about where the white spruce and the black spruce come together. Bob Marshall, great forest activist and forest protector in the early mid 20th century, graduate of the forestry school. He wrote about black spruce in Alaska with 80 growth rings of a tree no bigger than your thumb. There's a very slow growing trees and a very slow changing ecosystem at these northern latitudes, but they are changing radically. And Ben's book gives a very clear picture in terms of the cultures and the science in these different places around the world. And I highly recommend it. Plus, you got to read Peter Wellenden's book, The Hidden Life of Trees, what they feel and how they communicate. He calls it the discoveries from a secret world. I mean, it's kind of hokey, but he really delivers. And this German forester tells a fantastic story about his work in Germany and what he's learned about the forests there. I'm currently reading John Pastor's book, White Pine. I recommend it. For the tree nerds out there, buy it for them. But if you're just kind of shopping around, you want to get a feel for it, definitely borrow it from your local library. It is the natural and human history of a foundational American tree, and he delivers. It's a great book. And don't omit iTree. I want to be sure to add this resource for you. iTree is a collaborative effort between the United States Forest Service, the International Society of Arboriculture, the New York State University, State University of New York, College of Environmental Science and Forestry, Cornell, all these other folks working together to create these digital tools that will help everybody learn more about the trees and the forests and the challenges around them. Got to check that out. So we're zooming more and more local. One type of map most people are familiar with is something we call a plant hardiness zone map. Now, as you can see from this map, this is divided into 13 zones. And zone 1 is the pink, way in the north, and zone 13 is the brown, which is in the most desert regions, some of the hot regions of the earth, brown to yellow in the hot zones. So the lower the number, the lower the mean freezing temperature. So there's obviously things that you can grow in upstate New York that probably won't make it in Mexico. Now, there is a new plant hardiness zone map that's been available from New York State. This was issued in 2023, and it shows you what the average annual extreme minimum temperatures are between 1991 and 2020. So they've taken all the data they can over time, and they've mapped it to give us a good idea about a hardiness of the plants that we can grow. Now, this time they provided the data in a digital format for the analysis on something we call a geographic information system. That means I can import their data into my computer, and using a geographic information system software, I can analyze by county what the changes have been over time. And for the South Central Library District between 1990 and 2023, you can see a gradual warming of the zones in this footprint. Now, certainly the 2023 data is accurately mapped in terms of the data that was provided. There's no doubt that any methodological problem with this analysis is my own, but to give them credit and to comply with their request, here's some USDA reference. These folks provide this handy map to us, and they partnered with Oregon State University to be sure that the data could be used by GIS practitioners around the world. Now, the fact that our climate is changing very gradually is not an existential issue for us in upstate New York. Now, if we lived in South Miami, or if we lived in Alaska, we would be seeing and experiencing much more dramatic changes to our local environment. So by the time I'm much older and much grayer, we're going to be much more like Virginia, but we're not going to be the Sahara. So let's be clear about that. However, these gradual changes in a landscape that we have disturbed because of agriculture and development creates opportunities. And there are plants that have come from outside of our biome, have come out from outside of our continent, and they are finding an easy place to grow. And we term such plants invasive. And the reason we call them invasive is because we know that they disrupt normal ecosystem processes, and they degrade the capacity of our local ecosystems to provide the benefits and services that we come to expect, what we call today ecosystem services. So, for example, in New York State, oh, by the way, this is a page from the New York State list of prohibited and invasive plants, prohibited and regulated. So, for example, some examples of prohibited plants that are invasive that are going to be a challenge for you. Wherever you are, whatever park you're working in, you're going to have a challenge with common buckthorn, hopefully not giant hogweed for reasons I'll explain. Japanese knotweed is extremely common. I have not been to a county in New York State that does not have Japanese knotweed. I'm sorry to say. Likewise, multifloral rose. These are invasive shrubs that are very difficult to eradicate, and they make it extremely difficult to propagate the native plants that are our true heritage. Regulated species are those that can be planted under certain circumstances, and we are not necessarily in trouble if we have them on our property, but they are a cautionary note. We should not plant black locust, and you must not plant Norway maple. You cannot intentionally introduce these plants into the wild. But on regulated plants, there is some regulatory wiggle room that has created quite a bit of confusion in the nursery industry, I'm sorry to say. I'll give you a few examples. Japanese knotweed has been identified by some folks as one of the worst invasive plants in the temperate ecosystems of the world. It's now global, right? That's almost everywhere in a temperate ecosystem. When in flower, it's hard to miss. Bees love it. As you can see, I can touch it, won't hurt me. But once it takes hold, the very tough rhizomes and rooting structures give it enormous resiliency, and it does not share soil with anyone. On the other end of a toxicity spectrum is giant hogweed. It's worse than poison ivy. Okay, it's worse than poison sumac. It is a dangerous plant. It is a toxin. Do not touch this plant. Unless you have the proper equipment, or you have properly been trained, you have the correct tools, you don't want to mess with this plant. All parts of the plant that I'm aware of contain resins that cause a phytophotodermatitis. Okay, so the toxin in the foliage and stem of this plant actually degrades the skin's ability to produce melanin. So you can get, once you get this stuff in your skin, you can get a sunburn from the light in your office. It will blister and cause terrible pain and itching that can last for decades. You must avoid this plant. It's recognized by absolutely enormous leaves. Some of these leaves get up to 3, maybe even 4 feet across. The plant can be 14 feet tall and is kind of notorious for these spectacular blossoms. Don't treat it casually. I put this picture in here because I look a lot better like this than when I put on a Tyvek suit and have a face shield on and rubber gloves, but you don't handle this plant without a great deal of care. Let me introduce you to your next partner, IMAP Invasives. A fantastic resource coordinated by a network of groups around the state through an agency in New York State to help us track and learn about invasive insects and invasive plants that are disrupting ecosystems around New York State. The state has been divided up into invasive species management units called PRISMs. And on their website, you can visit your local PRISM and learn about activities that are taking place in your community. And they host a lot of great activities. How to do pollinator gardens, how to learn to identify some plants. Of course, everybody's going to go home and remember first how to identify poison ivy, right? That's the first thing you're going to do. So be sure to check out your local PRISM connection. Now, probably the most impactful voice, practically an evangelist for planting native species, is Dr. Doug Tallamy. His books, Bringing Nature Home and The Nature of Oaks, help us appreciate the enormous benefit that native plants provide to the entire ecosystem. Not just what you and I value in terms of the services trees provide by cooling our yards and shading us and giving us privacy and beautiful fall color, fruit and nuts, but they also are a host for innumerable plants. Yes, plants grow on plants, and insects, mammals, and birds that thrive through the enormous benefits contributed by our native plants. So you got to check out Doug Tallamy. So native trees to consider in the landscape where you live. You got to think about oaks. They're definitely slow growers. And I hear all the time, people want to plant a tree, but they want a fast grower. Well, fast is kind of a matter of opinion, but I am partial to white oaks and red oaks. You must plant them where they can be protected. They're not an easy thing to grow. Deer love them. And a number of small mammals will chew into their cambium while you think it's a beautiful little tree with a little bit of snow. And underneath the snow, there are animals chewing on that bark. Eventually, they can chew down into the roots. So you take a little bit of care, but I strongly recommend white and red oaks. They're great in the backyard. And I also am a strong advocate for planting hickories, one of the slowest growers here east of the Mississippi. Fabulous tree, fantastic ecosystem services, deeply rooted, and especially our shagbark and shellbark hickories, stunning, absolutely stunning fall color. I recommend beech. I think it's a lovely tree. I think it's a handsome tree. Yes, we have a number of diseases that make life difficult for beech. There's a beech scale disease, which is really tough on their bark, and there's a new beech leaf disease that scientists in New York State are studying very carefully. However, I still think they are a very important part of our local ecosystem, and I strongly recommend them. Another tree to think about for our future is sweet gum. There are some cultivars that do not grow the seeds, and because some people do not appreciate the little spheres of seeds that do gather in the fall. I strongly recommend red maples. They're terrific trees because when the situation is really moist, they can grow wet feet. When the situation is periodically dry, they can adapt to that. They're very adaptable plants, and they're do pretty well in urban and suburban environments. Got to pay very close attention to their form, and they do require pruning. So every 5 to 7 years, you got to prune these. If you're not sure how to prune, and that's why you call your ISA arborist to help you prune your trees. And they are spectacular. Most of these have produced very little mess, and they're gorgeous in the fall. I am in love with service berries. You got to check them out. They go by many names, like Nannyberry, or one of my favorite names, uh, for serviceberry, harkens back to the days when they would bloom during the shad runs along the coast of the Atlantic. So they're often called shad bush. Terrific low growing tree, very tolerant of shade. We're having good luck with them along streets as well. I'm also a big fan of hop hornbeam, which is one of our native understory trees, a low grower, relatively slow grower, but with a nice full canopy. And insofar as your understory is concerned, when you've got decent control over deer browsing, go with elderberries. I love aronia, fantastic tree. The shrub aronia produces a bitter fruit that has an extremely high antioxidant content. Fantastic. Alders and viburnums are a must. Now, I mentioned deer several times because if you can control deer access, you can even create an herbivory underneath, right? Herbaceous, beautiful wildflowers, okay? Mayapples and trillium in an urban site in Auburn, New York. Fantastic wildflowers. Not even a 10-minute walk from downtown. And speaking of downtowns, that's where it gets hot. So more and more we're hearing about urban heat islands. These are places in the United States that get extremely hot in the summertime. As you can notice, the day and nighttime temperature curves go warmer as the land use changes left to right from rural into industrial and then into downtown areas. Because in our downtowns, that's where we have blacktop and concrete, cars, roofs, and buildings. Those are surfaces that tend to absorb heat and they don't reflect the heat. And so that at night when they radiate heat, downtowns are much warmer. Now, what's happening is as our climate warms, the overall average profile of our temperatures is increasing as well. So our average temperatures are going up, but so are the extremes. And those extremes of heat kill more Americans than those who are killed by freezing. This becomes a very dangerous situation. 3 days in a row of triple-digit temperatures can be fatal for many of our friends and neighbors. So I want to show you, this is a screenshot of a Google product called Google Earth Engine. It's not Google Maps, not Google Earth, it's an Earth engine. And what it does is it allows users to run code to do things with satellite imagery that you cannot ordinarily do with regular Earth viewers. And we've been gifted by the talented geophysicist, Dr. Sofia Ermida. She wrote some JavaScripts, which is a scripting or coding language that she shared with the world that you can plug into the Google Earth engine to generate your own heat island maps. I mean, talk about generous. And here is a screenshot of a urban heat island map I was creating for a particular date in 2018 in Brooklyn. And you can change the overlay. And on that particular day, the red indicates extremely high temperatures, and the green is where it's cooler, typically in the parks and in the suburban areas. Here is a land surface temperature map for Auburn that I made from the data that Sophia's scripts allowed me to process, the data from July 2017. The hotspots show up as 118 degrees. That's determined by the model. When you go out and check what the actual temperature of these surfaces are, or at 2 meters above the ground, it's much hotter. How do we know? Because every summer we run a youth conservation corps. This is a bunch of students last year, they're middle school kids who spent 4 days studying the urban forest in Auburn. And one of our exercises was to measure land surface temperatures in different land uses in the city of Auburn. Our Auburn Conservation Corps with 3 or 4 teachers. We had 4 boys, 4 girls. We had a lot of fun last summer. Now, talking about the urban forest, what do I mean by urban forestry? So I have a couple shots of me and my old buddy Charlie Ride. We used to go out and plant a lot of trees together, clean up and replace and do what was necessary and generally make tree planting trouble. Most of us in America live in an urban environment, more than 80% of us. And urban areas occupy more land in the United States than Rhode Island and New Hampshire combined. I'm sure a lot of our friends are still driving back from their jaunt to New Hampshire yesterday to see the eclipse. I know they're sleepy, but maybe stay awake. We know trees are beautiful and they add value to our property. And the shade keeps urban surfaces cool. And this is vital. Think of every tree as a gigantic air conditioner. They cool the air as they transpire water. And so we are paying attention, a great deal of attention these days to what we call the urban tree canopy. This is the area of land that is shaded by trees when viewed from directly above. Now in America, the average tree canopy is about 27%. That means a lot of places are well suited and they're okay. And then there's a lot of communities that don't have enough trees. So how much canopy works for you? Well, my favorite is Cecil K's rule. It's an interesting guy from Europe. He calls it the 330-300 rule, which suggests that to experience the best that trees can offer, every city and suburban resident should, one, have 3 trees visible from their home, 2, have 30% canopy coverage in their neighborhood, and live within 300 meters, which is about 1,000 feet, of green space. That's his 330-300 rule. Next book here. Got to check out Jill Jones's book, Urban Forest. I'm telling you, this is a great read. She is not only a terrific writer, she is spot on every step of the way. I couldn't find anything wrong with this book. She talked to everybody. She looked into everything with incredible detail. Fascinating book. And it is a great read to understand where we are in the United States in our capacity to actually conserve the green spaces in our communities. And you don't have to read it cover to cover. Get the chapter and dig into the one you want, the one you like, and I promise you're going to be very pleased. How do I know she's right? Well, because I'm a fan of Dr. Nina Basic. Nina, I've joined the legions of New Yorkers who wish you wouldn't retire, but I celebrate your retirement. I still have a year to go or so. Because Nina Basic, Dr. Basic has been key to the development of the Urban Horticultural Institute. Again, this link I provided to Jessica, you'll all have it. A wealth of resources for every community everywhere. Fantastic information is available. Her book, The Bare Root Method, is fantastic. It gets you started with one particular tree planting technology, which is a very big boost to stretch your dollars and involve everyone in your community. Because with a tree, when you plant bare root, you can now involve all kinds of kids and all kinds of middle school and high school kids. Work with your DPW and have partnerships and get the trees planted in your neighborhoods. She also has a fantastic woody plants database. This is a searchable database that gives the searcher lots of ideas to think about. What are your soils like? Is there a lot of salinity? How much shade do you really have? What's the aspect? What are your goals? Very, very thought-provoking. And a fantastic guide on the planting and maintaining of trees and shrubs. Got to check it out. And then the last book I'll mention here is by Hannah Lewis, who is describing the Miyawaki method. And she calls it the mini forest revolution. It's based on the science of Dr. Miyawaki, who, as an ecologist and a biologist, learned about the successional stages of plant communities with a thought towards how he could jumpstart the delivery of the final mature stage of a forest. And the lessons in this book are profound, and the opportunities for communities are innumerous. So that's what I've covered today, Jessica. I'd like to open it up for questions because I know everyone wants to get out and enjoy this sunshiny day.
Yeah, that sounds great. So somebody was asking, I didn't have a chance to look at the list of resources that you shared. Is the list of trees that you prefer planting in that resource guide?
I did not, but I will. I promise I'll send that to you today, so you can send it out with that list.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and you could also, if you don't mind, share the slides with me and I can send those out to everybody as well.
Okay.
David from Binghamton shared that Binghamton's only arborist works in the rec department of Binghamton. So that's surprising to hear there's just one for that city.
Oh, well, I actually have pictures of your honey locust along that road that bisects near Broadway in Binghamton. I really love their placement, and I took a number of pictures of your honey locust down there. Sorry to say, invasive Japanese knotweed in downtown Binghamton. I can take your colleague to it. They're trying their best, but I'm telling you, plants like this are showing up everywhere. We've got invasive Japanese knotweed all over the Shenango River, and we've got it in downtown Ithaca as well.
I was curious just because you mentioned beekeeping and then you're building that beautiful wooden house and it's about to be carpenter bee season. Any recommendations for carpenter bees or?
Well, they have done a lot of damage to our timber frame. I can tell you that. I am not a certified pesticide applicator. I did have that certification many years ago, but I try not to use a lot of chemicals. I prefer neem oil, NEEM, with some dilution. You can squirt it into the holes. It is a plant compound based on the neem plant, and I find it to be very effective. The bumblebees don't like it. Online on YouTube, you can find instructions for taking a mason jar and a chunk of wood, and you can attach them together and hang them in such a way that the bumblebees are attracted to the holes in the wood and they end up inside the mason jar. It's non-toxic, but it does lead to their demise, I am afraid to say. The other thing we have done is we've created spots in our property with other chunks of wood, let's say under a piece of roofing steel, to try to distract them into a more palatable option.
Mm. Yep, we're about to try the mason jar option, but I just feel bad killing the bees.
Yes, you're getting this list. Somebody had a question. I'm not sure when David asked about what to do. Binghamton's only arborist works in the rec department. Well, he might be the only arborist you know about, David, but if you go on to isa.arbor.com, you can search by county, and you're going to find certified arborists down in Broome County, I promise. It says here, I recognize a lot of academic librarians in our attendees. Walt, do you have ideas on how a college librarian might start some tree-friendly projects? Yes. Become a certified tree campus USA. The National Arbor Day Foundation has a program to certify municipalities in their forestry efforts. It's called Tree City. Well, they've got Tree Campus as well. And it was a lot of fun last month to be invited to Syracuse by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And they hosted everyone in New York State who secured their 2023 Tree City status, including campuses. So a number of college campuses, public and private, had the representatives come and get their due recognition for the hard work it took for them to get involved. And so there are lots of cool projects you can do in a college environment that lead to your certification and is a lot of fun and very interesting for the students as well.
Great, thank you. And then Claire was sharing there's a group around Syracuse and Liverpool that does monthly meetings at Liverpool Public Library. They're a chapter of Wild Ones, and they've created a discussion guide that librarians can host and lead for free.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, I will encourage folks to go to your wherever you are in this 14 county region. And Claire tells me it's something like 10,000 square miles. So whatever I suggest, it's not going to help somebody. But I promise, wherever you are, there's fairly close to you a nursery that specializes in native plants. And you will find fantastic support there. I didn't want to give the list I knew because I didn't want to seem like I'm playing favorites, because I know there's somebody out there I didn't know. Which also reminds me, every county soil and water conservation district has their annual plant sales starting. They usually start advertising it February, March. for delivery in April, it might not be too late to order plants from your local soil and water conservation district. And what they'll do is they're basically bringing plants in from the New York State Nursery in Saratoga, and they bring the plants in, and they're great price. And generally speaking, it's great to plant when the weather's awful. So in April, when it used to be yucky and cold and icy and snowy, that would be great for the plants. Don't wait until it's sunny and warm in May and June. April is a great time to plant.
Right, and there were a couple more resources shared in the chat. I'm not seeing any more questions though, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from me with all of these great resources. I did put a link in the chat to a survey about this webinar if you get a chance to fill that out. And I really want to thank you, Walt, for sharing all of these great resources and some of your very inspiring projects. So thanks so much.
Okay, hope you all had fun. I know I did.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody, and get out and enjoy the sunshine if you can.
If you can. Bye-bye.
Bye.